Hi, we want to let you know you're in the right place today with Operation Parent and Dr. Aaron Weiner. Thank you so much for joining us. As we're pulling folks up in the queue, we're going to let you know about a couple of events coming up here at Operation Parent. So we will be recording the webinar today, and you also will receive a certificate of attendance since you're here with us live at the close of the webinar. And additionally, you're going to get a link to the survey right as we close the webinar. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that in just a moment. We hope that you might just take a minute and mark your calendar for May 2nd. Our next webinar is going to be focusing on what every single family needs to know about fentanyl. It's with the Song for Charlie group out of California, and with Jen Epstein and Laura Didier. We couldn't be more happy to work with them here shortly. And so I'd love for you to just tap on the QR, take a picture of the QR code, and register for the upcoming May 2nd webinar. Just take a minute to do that while we're pulling everyone into the webinar today. Or also, just write down the date on your desk, on your calendar, so that we would love it if you were to join us again in May. I'm going to take you through a couple of the ways that you can participate in the webinar today. So I'm going to take you through all of our technical pieces. So as you might know, we're a nonprofit coming to you out of Louisville, Kentucky. And the way that you're going to participate and get to know us a little bit better today is tapping on the orange arrow at the top of your screen. That's going to open your control panel all the way up so that you can participate. You're going to participate through the question feature. That's about the midways down on the panel. You're going to send both questions and comments privately there to Amanda and I. And you're going to type your questions in there. Again, we'll be the only two folks that see those. We've got a great handout lined up for you today. We've got a PDF of today's slides. On that PDF, if you want to go ahead and download it here, you can. So just tap on it and you'll start the download process while you're live with us, or you can also check your email. We worked on trying to send that to you ahead of time yesterday. And at the end of that PDF of the slides, you've got some awesome resources. If you've been with us in the past, you may have received several handouts from us. This time, we included all the resources in the PowerPoint itself. So if you go to those last couple of slides, you're going to see a lot of the resources that Dr. Weiner has recommended and that we're also big fans of. And so things that are coming out of the Truth Initiative organization, Parents Against Vaping, the campaign for tobacco-free kids, and also Johnny Ambassadors. Laura Stack has been a past presenter with us on marijuana, and she's got excellent high THC research on her website, as well as very good education videos. And I came across a really good resource yesterday. If you just go there and look at her link about questions that she's most frequently asked about marijuana, there's a 3-page handout that you might really enjoy for some additional resources and research there as well. We are, let's see here, let me get back to my page. So again, you can download that PDF here. You can go check your email later if you're having trouble or you're not on a screen, if you're listening and not on a screen where you can download it today. For our attendees of this live webinar, there is a certificate of attendance, and that is going to be attached to your follow-up email. We are recording the webinar today, and that's going to also be sent in the next 24 hours. And so make sure that you check the email that you registered with us initially for both of those things, the recording and the certificate. You're going to be sent a very short survey right when we close the webinar today. We highly value your feedback, and we utilize that right away. You're really helping us continue to develop and grow this webinar program by taking the time to do that. So we're honored that you would use your time to help us grow and grow in the direction that is helpful for you. So now I also want to tell you about our mission at our nonprofit Operation Parent. It's to love and support parents by providing real-world information, connection, and most importantly, hope. So I'm super excited to turn the webinar over to Dr. Weiner. As if you've been with us before, you know he's done a couple of mini webinars with us, a couple really available quickly in our webinar library are one on vaping during COVID and what we were anticipating to happen there. And then there was one that we did with him in January on sex, drugs, and Netflix. Both of those are excellent webinars and additional resources for you. If you'd like to view those, you can go to our webinar library and just enter your name. And basically you can view the full webinar there. So it's my distinct pleasure to introduce you to a great friend to Operation Parent, a professional that's trailblazing to get people to know much more about marijuana, and for parents to be just on top of their game and know everything that they can about high THC concentrates. And so I always mention this, but a really great place to interact and connect with Dr. Weiner is on LinkedIn. He's putting really great content out there and making us think on deep topics just about every day. So if you're not connected there and you'd like to be, I would encourage you to do that. So Dr. Weiner, I'll turn it to you. Thank you so much for this presentation that you put together for us today.
Oh my gosh, of course. And thanks everybody for taking time out of your day to be part of the webinar, to be part of the presentation today. Hopefully we'll have time to answer some questions at the end, but there is so much to say on this topic around what's going on with vaping, nicotine, and THC. This is an area in particular that I'm really passionate about because I found that there is a pretty large gap between what teens and parents think that they know about these products and substances and then what actually we're being told from medical journals and peer-reviewed publications and government publications. And so my hope for you guys today is that we can close that gap and that you'll hear some things not only that can provide some insight, but also that you might be able to turn right around and use, whether or not it's at home, in your school, if you're part of a school district, or otherwise in your community. So the three areas in particular, the three things that I hope that you folks are going to be able to take away today are one, that vaping, nicotine, and THC, now the plant form of which we can call marijuana or cannabis, they do have a significant negative health impact on teens. And we're going to talk more about what that is specifically as we go along today. Youth are often direct or indirect targets of addiction for profit industries. And again, we'll talk about more of the reasons for this, but when you look at marketing, how these industries are positioned, how the dynamics around this work, you can see that they tend to skew young, and there's reasons for this. And lastly, and probably most importantly, you as a parent, there are plenty of things that you can do. You can impact teen health decisions through thoughtful and intentional communication. Talking how you talk and stating your expectations, how you feel about these topics really does make a difference, even if it doesn't seem like it, although there are ways that you can do it that tend to be a little bit more impactful than others. And so we'll be talking about that today as well. And so that being said, let's just go ahead and dive in because again, there is a lot to talk about and I hope to have some question time as well. So in terms of generally what we're looking at right now with youth substance use, By their senior year, a lot of young people have used a substance of some sort. About 70% have tried alcohol, 50% have used some illegal substance, and we are including THC in that category. About 40% will have used nicotine, 20% will have misused a prescription, and this drives into about 8% of the general population having a diagnosable substance use disorder. One of the key elements of this, though, is that particularly for alcohol and THC/marijuana products, if you are going to develop an addiction, a major problem with these substances, you have usually started to develop that problematic relationship before the age of 20. And that's part of why great organizations like Operation Parent, and perhaps also locally in your communities, there are groups called DFCs, or drug-free community groups, that are trying to help young people get through that critical window without starting. Because if you don't start then, again, particularly for these substances, you generally don't struggle with this. But unfortunately, if you look at this from the lens, or through the lens, of someone who's selling THC products or someone who's selling nicotine products, that means if a lot of your money comes from people who have an addiction, you've got to look young. You've got to aim towards that younger crowd, because those are the folks who come back and back over the course of their life. And so what we're seeing, if we just want to say start here by looking at nicotine and vaping, which is going to be our first topic of the day, after we're coming here out of the major societal changes that we experienced over COVID, we're seeing the same trend with vaping, where the most recent data we have shows that we're now a 21% increase in vaping over the previous year. We did see a vaping dip over COVID. There's a lot of reasons for that, like kids not getting out as much, being potentially under more supervision. But now that they're back in school, they've got their extracurriculars back, we're starting to see this trend pick right back up where it left off. We also, and we're not going to talk too much about this today, are in the midst of a very significant mental health epidemic with kids, with a tremendous amount of depression, a tremendous amount of anxiety, and using substances tends to be one of these coping strategies that young people might choose to use if they don't have other strategies available. So I'm hopeful that we don't see a very large rise in substance use over the next couple of years, but I'm not counting on it, because in all honesty, if historical precedent tells us anything, it's that it's probably going to get, unfortunately, worse. But bringing us back to vaping, I think it's important to know how we got here to know where we go, or how we go forward. And how we got here has a lot to do with the story of Juul. And Juul essentially was one of the first vape companies that really rose to prominence. Their market share was rising while everyone else was middling or declining. And a big part of the reason for that was that they developed a way of delivering nicotine to the brain faster than regular cigarettes, and a heck of a lot faster than any vapes or e-cigs that had been brought to market to date. And they did that by inventing these nicotine salts. They mixed it with benzoic acid, and that gave them this really strong hit. And purportedly, they said they were doing this to get current smokers onto vapes, but they were told, and this is part of why Juul has been losing a lot of lawsuits and are now essentially a shell of the company that they once were. They were told that this also means that for young people who use this device, it's going to have that even greater nicotine pull than even a cigarette does. Yet they moved forward with this anyway. And that plus flavors, which we went into in a previous vaping presentation that we partnered with Operation Parent for, so we're not going to go as deep into that today, a little bit, but not as deep. That was another big reason as well. Now, when we're talking about vapes, they come in a few different shapes and sizes. Juul, again, was kind of like the first wave. They're called a cartridge-based system, where you have a cartridge that you stick on the end of the vape that has the nicotine, and previously, as in this image, they had a bunch of flavors. Now Juul can actually only sell tobacco-flavored vapes, which is part of why the company has crashed and burned, because that's not what teens are using anymore. The other two types of vapes you're going to see generically are tank-based systems, or mods, where you refill the device with new, what's colloquially called juice, or vape juice, but it's essentially a liquid that has nicotine and flavoring in it, as well as a bunch of other stuff, more on that in a second. but you refill this over and over and over again. But the most popular these days are disposables, which have anywhere between 1 pack and multiple packs of cigarettes worth of nicotine in them, and you just throw them out when you're done. So it's something as well where, hence the name disposable. It means though that if someone's about to get caught, they can pitch it. They're not going to be out that much money. They don't cost that much. There's actually been some very interesting environmental research on the implications of throwing away all these lithium batteries, but perhaps they're a story for another day. But these disposables really are the key driver of when you ask what are kids using right now. The dominant brand today in the United States is Puff Bar. Overseas, it's called Elf Bar. And so there are plenty of other brands out there, but those are the two that we're seeing most right now. And this is something that we've seen before in terms of targeting youth with nicotine products. The Master Settlement Agreement for Big Tobacco released this absolute trove of internal documents where we heard them talking about how they need to attract teenagers. We want to develop them into the future market. These folks, by the way, Big Tobacco, are also investing heavily in cannabis stock for various reasons, one of which is that all these addiction for profit, intoxicating industries, there's a lot of ties between them. But this is, again, this is nothing new. Same thing with Joe Camel. It's something where that entire idea of let's appeal to the nonconformists and the rebels and make it feel edgy, because that's what kids are always into as teenagers. They're trying to define themselves and differentiate from their parents. Now, there's a lot of ways to do that that aren't necessarily harmful. The problem is, though, that vaping is harmful to your health, particularly if you are young. So what we know about vaping, and this is from the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, as well as other sources, is that vaping is addictive, and that's due to that nicotine content. It includes numerous toxic substances other than nicotine, some of which are heavy metals. Different components have different levels of toxins, though. Part of this is because a lot of the vaping liquid industry is not fully regulated yet. There's a lot of cat and mouse dancing going on right now by the companies and the FDA to try to avoid actually having to submit their products and get them approved. But that means that you don't entirely know what's in there, but the devices themselves also can be made at different levels of quality and can flake off metal from the heating coil, have potentially other contaminants as well. But perhaps most importantly, vape aerosol does have chemicals that cause DNA mutagenesis, and that's the process that causes cancer. So while we don't have those really long, decades-long studies on vaping yet that demonstrates that clear link between vaping and cancer like we do for cigarettes, vaping causes the thing that causes cancer. So if we give it a little bit of time, we're very likely to get there. Now, what are these chemicals? There are a lot of them. Berkeley Labs searched for several, found 31. Formaldehyde and others are very common. Here's are some of the heavy metals that you can see here, including cadmium and lead and nickel. But I want to point out one here in particular about where it comes from, and that is the formaldehyde. And part of what's surprising, you talk to teens about this and they'll be like, how, I don't believe you. How is this possible? I thought that vaping was just flavoring and nicotine and water, basically, or, all natural materials. There's a lot of those sorts of terms thrown around in the industry. And even the name, right? Vapor sounds like water vapor, which it is not. What you are actually breathing in is an aerosol, chemicals suspended in air. But aerosoling sounds kind of bad for you, whereas vaping sounds kind of, harmless and benign. So you can kind of see why the industry went the way that it did. But the formaldehyde comes from thermal degradation, or pyrolysis rather is another way to say that. When you superheat a chemical, it decomposes into potentially a lot of different stuff. Formaldehyde comes from propylene glycol, which is one of the two main liquids in vape juice. So you'll hear it called PG, which stands for propylene glycol, and VG, which stands for vegetable glycerin. And so one of the things that PG, propylene glycol, breaks down into is formaldehyde. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't stop there. There's been a study that came out last year that to me was incredibly useful. I'm so glad that these researchers did this, where they actually looked at what is in vape aerosol if we actually lay it out by molecular weight. And what they found here was that depending on the brand, there are between 1,000 and 2,000 different chemicals you put in your lungs when you suck in, when you drag on a vape, when you hit a vape. That is less, and I should mention this. It's important to acknowledge this. That is less than cigarettes. Cigarettes, that number is 7,000, but 1 to 2,000 chemicals is still a lot more than zero. A heck of a lot more than zero. Which is, our lungs are designed for air, right? That's what we're supposed to be putting in there. So absorbing all of these other chemicals, very, very, very unhelpful and harmful. What this graph here on the left is showing, everything in that box. So most of these chemicals, by the way, they don't have a name. They're not identified. We don't know exactly what they are, what they do, what the long-term health implications are. But everything in this box has a resemblance to something that could be carcinogenic. In this one, they're showing everything that looks lipid-like or fat-like. And that's very important, because if you think back to early to 2020 or the end of 2019, you might remember that there was this vape epidemic going on amongst young people where they were getting hospitalized. About 120, I believe, young people died. That was caused by vitamin E acetate, which is a very oily sort of substance, breaking down into another substance called ketene. More on that also later, that'll come back around. But that is what was causing that epidemic by and large. All of these chemicals look like a fat, and that's going into your lungs, and that is, for obvious reasons, very concerning. Now, besides those really acute effects, there are also long-term impacts of adolescent nicotine use in terms of what it does to the brain. It actually changes serotonin signaling, which is a neurotransmitter in the brain, and limbic system development, which leads to reduced attention span, increased impulsivity, enhanced anxiety and fear responses, depressive symptoms in adulthood, and is correlated with young people being more likely to use other drugs, high-risk sexual behavior, and the development of psychiatric disorders. So you may ask yourself then, if it has all of these negative implications, and then around the flavors in particular, why are they still here, right? If we know that 85% of kids use vapes for the flavoring, and this is something that's been shown in study after study, it's about the flavors, then why can we go online and buy blueberry and watermelon and all of these fruity and sweet flavors in vapes? Well, the answer is money. Particularly, how can we use kids to make as much money as possible? Because these are industries that would much rather make money when this is kind of like one of those ask for forgiveness rather than permission models, where they're going to do it because they stand to gain a lot for as long as they can, and chances are whatever fines are levied or whatever ends up happening will be financially worth it. Because from a public health perspective, you ask anybody who cares about teen health, and they're going to say, oh yeah, the collateral damage of flavored vapes is immense. Now, the other side of this equation, when we're talking about vaping and vaping updates, is the other main substance that kids are using, and that has to do with THC and marijuana. And this is a particularly bad idea for kids, and I want to talk to you guys for a little bit today about why. And I'm going to use a few of these terms, not quite interchangeably, but I want to take a second to define it. I will probably say THC a lot. THC is the active component in marijuana or cannabis that gets you high and that is addictive. Marijuana is a cannabis plant that has a percentage of THC over 0.3%. And in the case of marijuana, it tends to be a lot higher. More on that in a minute. Hemp, if we're talking about hemp, or when we think about cannabis in the non-psychoactive sense, hemp is a cannabis plant that has less than 0.3% THC by volume and tends to have a lot of CBD or cannabidiol in it. That's something that was made legal by the Farm Bill in 2018 that will also come back and be relevant in a few minutes again, as it's actually being twisted in a way more recently to cause problems. But CBD itself, hemp, does not really have any major negative implications in and of itself for public health, and not necessarily for teen health either. We're not too concerned about that in the medical world. What we care about is THC, or cannabis plants with high THC, more commonly known as marijuana. So as you see those terms go around today, that's what I'm referring to. Now, in terms of addiction, I think it's really important to level set, just point blank, THC is an addictive drug. Marijuana is an addictive drug physiologically, physically in your body. This is not up for debate. There's zero misunderstanding about this in the medical community, in the addiction community. We've known it for decades. It's in all of our diagnostic manuals. It is addictive like alcohol is addictive, where the majority of people who use it do not develop an addiction, but a certain percentage do. Actually, that percentage is higher for kids than for adults. About 1 in 6 young people will develop a cannabis use disorder, is the technical name. Or actually, I apologize, I believe it's 1 in 8 will develop a cannabis use disorder. It's about 1 in 10 for adults. But if they are using it every day, that number spikes to somewhere between 25 and 50%. That again is just like alcohol, where if you're using it every day for either recreational purposes or self-medicating purposes, that's where problems come from. So just want to be explicitly clear about that. This is an addictive drug, and it is actually more addictive for youth and young people than it is for folks who are older. Second, the product that's being sold right now is a heck of a lot stronger than it used to be. Back at Woodstock, and even as late into the mid-90s, the average THC content in cannabis plants that were seized by the DEA was about 3 to 4%. You can see that down here at the left side of the graph. You can see over time how, as the industry has started to pick up, it's been bred and bred and bred to be more and more and more potent, to the point that in 2021, that average is now up to 15.34. And actually, in states that have legal markets, it's even higher than that. This was a study that came out in 2020 that was looking at, are low potency, which is what they're called now, products even available in these 9 states. And you can see that the percentage of products that are being sold that are under 15% THC are the vast minority, and almost nothing is under 5%, which is what it used to be. This study found that states that just have medical marijuana products, the average there was about 19%. States that have recreational, that goes up to 21.5%. So to put that another way, 1 joint of today's recreational marijuana is like literally lighting up 7 joints from the mid-90s and smoking them at the same time. And that's how much THC that young people put into their brains when they use these products. It's also worth mentioning there is actually no difference between medical and recreational marijuana products. The distribution, the reason why these numbers are different is just what proportion are being carried in different states. But just like there's no medical Percocet and fun Percocet, there's no medical marijuana and recreational. That's not, it's all the same stuff. The only difference is how it's taxed. You generally don't have to pay as many taxes if you have a medical card, but the product itself is no different. So third, there are a lot of negative academic and vocational outcomes that are related to THC use from kids. So in high school, it's related to lower grades, higher dropout rates, increased school disciplinary problems. This could be because of cognitive disruptions, and we're not going to dig too deep into that today, but it actually changes the way the brain literally structurally forms. We can put kids into fMRI machines during these longitudinal studies that are done, and we can actually see that certain parts of the brain, particularly the prefrontal cortex, which is involved in a bunch of different things, but it includes our personality as well as our, broadly speaking, executive functioning. That's things like planning, thinking abstractly, motivation, a lot of different things. That's up in the prefrontal cortex. And then also the hippocampus, which is the part of the brain that's used for learning and memory. Both of those parts of the brain tend to be the most impacted structurally, as well as then how your brain functions. And there have been studies longitudinally that have looked at IQ and found that yes, it can actually drop your IQ in a persistent way. The average of those studies is about 2 IQ points, which in and of itself, although statistically significant, and no one wants to lose IQ points, is not hugely large, but some of them are higher than that. In fact, one study found up to 8%, or not 8%, an 8-point IQ drop, which is very significant. So it's something that for the developing brain, which is happening up until 25 to 28, you really kind of want to let that bake without interfering with it very much. And so again, as little interference, contaminants, as few of those as you can put in, the better. So there are cognitive disruptions to consider here. There's also social functional impacts and reasons why grades are lower. So what this means is that if you have, say, a high schooler who is choosing to hang out with other high schoolers who get high for fun, it's probably not the same group of kids who is achieving at their highest potential and studying on a Thursday night in the library for their history test. They're getting high for fun instead, in general, right? It's not to say that this is for everybody, but essentially you are self-selecting yourself then into a group, into a peer group that is less likely to achieve at that highest level. And that means that you, because we tend to be very influenced by the people we surround ourselves with, are less likely to do that as well. We know that earlier use leads to worse outcomes in terms of THC, and greater frequency also leads to worse outcomes. We see the same thing in college, with an increased chance to skip class, lower GPA, a potentially longer time to graduate. When you look at studies where people report how much money did they make over the course of their life, and how does that relate to the amount of THC used over their life, we also find that the people who tend to use more marijuana and THC products tend to make less money. And again, I want to make very clear that for a lot of this data, we're talking about population level statistics here, which doesn't mean that, like, for every joint you smoke, take $1,000 out of your future self's pocket. Doesn't work that way. It has more to do with the lifestyle you choose, what you're doing to your brain, how that then manifests in the sorts of grades that you get, the connections that you make, the people you surround yourself with. It's almost impossible to parse everything out. But when we start to look at these trends, we start to notice that there are some very significant ones. And a study that came out just last year looked at exactly that. When we compare young people who either, and that's this left column here, use THC products frequently versus those that do not, what do we see? And without getting into all the statistical gobbledygook here, I'm just going to explain what you're seeing here in this left chunk. What this is saying is that if the kids who frequently use THC products are more likely to have issues related to psychosis, that's this top line, and more on that in a couple minutes, very, very likely, this is actually the most significant result, to have problematic substance use. More on that on the next slide, actually. They are also more likely to have delinquency problems, to have issues with debt, to have lower general well-being, to feel socially excluded. And then the second most significant finding here is that they are more likely to both not be in school and not have a job if they frequently use this during adolescence. And then you look at them then when they become young adults. So all of that not positive, but I do want to take a second to highlight this one that was the most significant, that being other substance use. And we are not going to drive too far into this right now just for lack of time, but I do want to make the point that there have actually been several studies now that show that THC and marijuana products are becoming increasingly so the beginning of what's called the drug sequencing for young people, in terms of they start with a certain drug and then may eventually proceed on to other drugs later on in life because they've given themselves basically permission to get high, permission to break the law. They're surrounding themselves with others who do the same. That means the likelihood of coming into contact with some of these other drugs is higher. We could talk more about this perhaps at another time, but just what the data tells us, this is again a longitudinal study that was looking at a young adult cohort. Kids here who did not use at all when they were adolescents, this is the chance that they used any opioids at all, that's the left bar, prescription opioids, and then heroin there on the right. And you can see here, this is for a low to non-user category. If we pop over here to adolescent with limited use of THC products, you can see how far those bars jump up. And then kids who are chronically using THC products, look at how much higher that is. It's almost a 50% chance that they're going to have misused some type of opioid, and 15%, or rather, 13 point, let's not round up, 13.8% of these kids ended up using heroin at some point in the future. This was from a cohort of urban kids in particular. This study is hot off the presses. It was published literally last month. And they were looking at specifically, do we see this effect differently for different types of THC products? And what they found was the product that was most associated with going on to use these quote unquote harder drugs like meth, heroin, etc., were THC concentrates. So if you've heard of dabbing, that's what this is. There's a lot of products that fall into that category: wax, shatter, butter, etc. But those that dab had a 5.74 times greater chance, and this is again longitudinal study, of using harder drugs over time. The second was those who used edibles. The third were those that were vaping THC. This is again a lot more concentrated than smoking, but even that was a 2.57 times increase. If a young person used only one product, they were at a 2.34 times greater chance of using a harder drug as you look further down the line in their life. And if they use more than one product, so if they smoke sometimes and vape some other times, if they're having edibles and dabbing, that was 3.82 across all different products. So again, we could talk quite a bit more about this. This study just came out quite literally, I believe, 2 weeks ago. So this is very new. But this is looking at, again, that connection between what are kids doing, and then what are the implications then on what they do in the future. So in terms of the brain, I mentioned this a little bit already, so I'll go quickly through this bullet point, but there are changes to brain structure and function, which can lead to this residual impairment that sticks around. We also know that it can lead to impaired judgment. When you are high, you don't make the best decisions, which one of these consequences of that we found has been increased risky sexual behavior. We've also found that it can lead to psychotic breaks. And this is not an exaggeration or, quote unquote, reefer madness. This is peer-reviewed medical data over and over and over again. This study in particular actually tried to show as best as possible something more than a correlation, because that's another argument you'll hear, is that these folks were just going to develop schizophrenia anyway, and this would not have happened. And again, the preponderance of data, it shows the opposite. This is creating new cases. What this study found was that there's a 50% greater chance that you're going to develop at least a single episode of psychosis, if not a persistent psychotic disorder, aka schizophrenia, and others, but that's the main one. 50% greater chance if you're using today's quote unquote regular smokable product, which is again much more high potency, 7 times than it used to be. That number goes up to 5 times, 500% more likely if you are using concentrates, so either dabbing or vaping it. Now, how common is this? This study came out last year, and it actually surprised even me. And I have a very good vantage point on this issue. I was previously a hospital administrator, and in our inpatient psychiatric ward for kids, we always had kids there, usually between 2 and 5, who had one of these psychotic breaks. This study that came out last year was looking to determine, does the geographic area matter for, so if someone is living in a state with recreational marijuana, are there more episodes of cannabinoid-induced psychosis there? And the answer, which was not much of a surprise, was yes. But what was surprising was how many of these they found in 2017. They found 129,000 hospital discharges for cannabinoid-induced psychosis in the United States. That's 1 person every 4 minutes has a psychotic break in the United States due to cannabis, due to THC. And that was in 2017, when fewer people were using than they are now. So this is a very real issue. It's not something that happens to everybody, but it is happening to 1 person every 4 minutes. So it's something that we need to really be very serious about. The last category that we see a lot with kids and we need to be mindful of is drugged driving. And what the statistics tell us is that kids are 4 times more likely to drive high than to drive drunk, which shows a huge knowledge gap, that they don't understand that it actually does very much affect you. And it affects you even after it's left the blood. THC leaves your blood very quickly. That's this pink line. That's because it's lipophilic. It's attracted to fat, so it shoots out of your blood and into your brain very, very quickly. But unlike with alcohol, when it's out of your brain, or rather out of your blood, it doesn't really affect you anymore. THC does. And that's why the subjective high, that's this blue line, is not at 0. And the performance on a motor control task is also not recovered yet. This is a list of all the different cognitive and driving related behaviors that are affected by THC. We're not going to go over all of it now, but they are significant. It's not that it has no effect or you just drive more slowly and more carefully. That is not how this works. You're at greater risk of an accident. Now, despite the fact that there are all these risks to young people, the perceived risk of this substance, of THC, of marijuana, has been steadily declining over time, while objectively, the product has been getting more and more harmful. Which seems odd, right? Like how would that be the case? Well, a lot of it has to do with marketing, and there's been research that has been published that shows that cannabis companies tend to systematically use marketing that appeals to young people. I'm located outside Chicago. Couple quick examples of this from my neighborhood. Cannabis dispensaries were handing out their swag at summer fairs and then didn't apologize when we're given the chance to do so. They also broke the law and used animals as mascots. That is not, you're not allowed to do that in Illinois. But what made this even more egregious was, this was called their party raccoon, is that just down the street from this dispensary was Ravinia Elementary School, which uses a raccoon as its mascot. The products themselves also are called names that appeal very clearly to young people. Brownie Scout, banana cookies, mandarin cookies. This was just me taking products right off the front page of one of the dispensary's websites in my area. You can also see here that we've got 18% here, 26% here, 20, 24. But if we go to the concentrates, that jumps up by a lot. These concentrates can be up to, I've seen 99% pure concentrates. This is 71% THC pineapple muffin. And the reason why it's so important for them to control this is that if you don't perceive this substance to be risky, you're far more likely to use it. What this graph is showing is that kids who perceived there to not be a great risk of binge drinking did it twice as much. Kids that perceived there not to be a great risk of marijuana use did it 15 times as often in the past month in this data set. And in fact, kids have actually even told us, seniors in high school, that if marijuana is legalized in their state, they are going to either give it a shot or increase how much they're currently using. Part of that is messaging. Part of that also is just availability. We've even found that dispensary location has an impact on how much kids use. This study was looking at California and found that how living near more medical dispensaries was positively associated with whether or not they thought it would do good things for them and if they were going to use it. This study looked at the same thing in Washington State and found the same thing as well, that if the closer they are to it, the distance moderated the norms and their intention to use marijuana, and states should consider where they place these things because the location does matter. This was another study that found that how close they were to the dispensary mattered. So we could talk a lot. There's literally a dozen more studies that found that as well. But we are somewhat low on time, so we're just going to keep going for now. So I want to try to get through the rest of my slides in the next 10 minutes. Again, so much to talk about. But I want to talk about Delta-8 THC because you might have heard about this too. And this is a psychoactive THC product that right now is exploiting a loophole in the Farm Bill. I mentioned that 2018 Farm Bill that allows for CBD and hemp to be sold legally everywhere. Delta-8 THC is made from CBD, but because it comes from CBD and from hemp, it completely circumvents all state and federal laws around regular marijuana, if you will, derived THC products. So they can be sold out of gas stations with cartoons and all sorts of marketing. It's not quite as strong as Delta-9, although more on that in a second. Now, how this works is that CBD is actually what's called a prodrug for a lot of other cannabinoids. So, for example, little known fact, if you smoke or vape CBD, part of it breaks down into delta 9 THC, which is the regular THC that you would get from marijuana. So if you're vaping CBD, you're not going to pass a drug test. But it also means that you can use chemicals to modify it to turn it into a bunch of different things. Right now, it is legal in 39 states across the country. Again, we're going to go quickly through this right now for sake of time. And I encourage you to look at the slides to see where you are in there. And again, it's completely unregulated. It's made using toxic chemicals. The FDA's put out a warning about this, but it doesn't stop there, unfortunately. There are a lot of other what are called synthetic cannabinoids that you can make from CBD and hemp. THCO acetate is probably the second most common, and is rumored to be 3 times as strong as regular THC. I say rumored because we don't actually have like published peer-reviewed data on this, because it's so experimental. Essentially, it's so new. It's made again from Delta 8, which is made from hemp, so you can buy this sort of stuff online at a gas station. It also has the propensity to cause a valley. This is a study that just came out about a month ago, and what it found was that vitamin E acetate, if you recall, this is what caused that initial epidemic. It creates ketene. Well, so does THCO. It also makes ketene. So does delta 9 THC acetate if you're making that. So there could be the implications of this, the fact that it's not studied, how it's delivered, could have very significant health implications. And again, doesn't stop there. There are other substances like HHC, which is also a psychoactive cannabinoid made from hemp. All of these products include delta 9 THC, the same thing you'll find in marijuana, but made from hemp, and therefore sold with whatever they want out of a gas station. And this, again, the rabbit hole goes so deep, guys. This is a vape that you can buy. This is just one vendor that's doing this. Here are all the products they're selling. This is one that is a blend of Delta 8, Delta 10 with THCH and JD. And we, from a medical perspective, we have no idea what's going to happen with all of this. So it's really important to recognize availability of these products is very, very high. Science around it is low. Regulation is literally non-existent for most of it. So this is a very, very bad time to be using substances. We haven't even talked about fentanyl contamination and xylazine and all those sorts of things just for drugs in general right now that we're worrying about. But with this, we have no idea what these sorts of products do. We just don't. It's highly experimental. And to draw these things together, vaping, nicotine is related to using THC products as well. Kids are 3.5 times more likely to use THC products if they are vaping. So that's a lot, right? So let's talk a little bit about what caregivers can do. And I apologize, folks, for needing to go quickly today. There's a lot to say, trying to pack as much as I can into this hour for you and still have some time for questions. I believe my email is on the end slide as well, so please feel free to reach out to me if we don't get to your question or you have a question about the slides. So my number one recommendation for parents and other caregivers is always stay connected and know the signs of use. If you don't know what normal is with your child, you're not going to know when it changes. So know who their friends are, know how their mannerisms, know what they like to do, how they have fun, pay attention to them in their lives, and it will pay off in so many different ways, including knowing when something is going in a negative direction. I'm going to put all these up here just to start, to go a little bit quickly, but if you have a young person who is struggling with vaping and substance use, you're probably going to see changes both in terms of how they function at school, their peer groups, how they are at home, and their mood, as well as some changes in how they look, in hygiene, how they're dressing, maybe like they're trying to identify with a different subculture per se. They might also identify a lot with substance use. But there's a lot of little hints. None of these in particular are necessarily indicative of a problem, but you start to piece things together and you start to see this trend of it popping out. So you want to know the signs of use and you want to stay connected. You need to be emotionally safe to talk to, including about difficulties and failures. This is so important. If your child can't trust you, they're not going to talk with you. And an acronym I like a lot for how to create emotional safety with your child is to communicate with love. Full disclosure, I did not make this up. That was the Center for Motivation and Change, but I really like it. It stands for listening, offering, validating, and empathizing. So listening means active listening. Don't just say, yeah, and then move on. Ask open-ended questions. Things like, what was the best part about your day? Or what are you struggling with right now? Something that a child needs to answer with more than a one-word answer. That means that shows that you care, as well as gives them the opportunity to do it. Even if they turn you down, it shows that you care. And then reflect with their content back to them in different words. Show them that you're listening. When you offer advice, you want to do it in a way that's not pushy, because when you push on a teen, that gives them the opportunity to push back. The way you can do this effectively is called a feedback sandwich, where you sandwich the feedback, the guidance, between two slices, if you will, of autonomy. So the first thing you do is you ask for permission to share advice. Hey, do you mind if I've got an idea that might help? What happens if you do that is they've literally asked for the advice. So that means you're, by definition, not pushing. So try asking first, then give the advice or the guidance, and then ask them how they feel about it. You can explicitly give them permission to disagree if you'd like. This makes it so that they basically consent to moving forward with it as well. So if they've asked for it and then said, you know what, I think that's not a bad idea. What we know from research is that folks are far more likely to take that advice and then do it when they're not right in front of you, which is when they really need to do it, than if you just say, here's what you need to do, or what you did was wrong, here's the right way to do it. V stands for validating. Let someone know that how they're feeling is natural and okay. Even if they made a less healthy decision, try to validate where it was coming from. It was coming from a very natural human emotion, like, say, wanting to feel accepted or being really stressed out. It was just the strategy that they used that was the problem. So really trying to validate the feelings, even if there's parts about the behavior that you need to talk about. And then similarly empathize with them. To borrow a phrase here from Brene Brown, get into the dark hole with somebody and sit with them for a minute before trying to get them out. Folks really appreciate that. People don't want you to just ride in on, like a white knight on a horse and carry them to safety. People want to feel seen and heard, and then perhaps ask if they'd like some guidance about how to get out. So the last part about this, in terms of how do you create emotional safety, is you have to be consistent. If you do not have this relationship with your child, it does not come up immediately. You can't just tell someone, hey, you can trust me, and have them believe you. Trust is a feeling. It has to come from feeling safe over time and experiencing that someone is safe. You can't tell someone you're safe. You have to show them that you're safe over and over again. So have persistence. Continue to just consistently speak to them in a safe way. And eventually, that's what's going to create the payoff of a closer and more open relationship. So lastly, you want to promote the development here of healthy coping behaviors. There's a lot of things you can do. I want to be mindful of the time again, so I apologize for going quickly here. But you want to help kids make sure they're paying attention to their physical health, like sleep, exercise, nutrition, screen time limits. Meditation is also a great way of coping, has tremendous benefits in so many different ways. A great app you can use to help kids learn is Headspace. They've got a lot of great teen and younger focused content on there. Quick note, they are not paying me. I'm not one of their spokespeople. I just really like the app, so you can check that out. Talk through problems with your child. Show them how that works. That is a really adaptive way to work through your feelings, and also models to them that that's how you can work through problems. And then don't be afraid to work with a therapist. Like if you guys have learned anything today from the presentation, that might be because this is my job. This is my profession. It's worth talking to us. We don't bite. Doesn't mean that you're like a bad parent if your child is struggling. There's certain things you can't control as a parent. People get into really bad cycles. Young people do. It's okay to work with us. Don't be afraid to reach out. A couple more points for you guys before we move into what schools can do and then finish up for the day and take a couple questions. If kids are acting out, they do need consistent boundaries and limits. Try to hold those steady. You also want to make sure that you reward the behavior you want to see. A really good phrase to keep in mind is that what you permit and what you reinforce, you promote. So you need to consistently have boundaries around negative behaviors, and you need to reward the behaviors you want to see. Make sure you're on your kids' phones. Most drug deals that go down between kids happen on Snapchat, Instagram. It's on their phones. You've got to be on there. Really big topic. I'm sure probably actually that Operation Parent has addressed in the past, so I check out their back catalog. Be on the same page as your parenting partner for that consistency, and take care of yourself and your marriage. Everything flows down from the parents. So you want to make sure that you are healthy, you're demonstrating healthy coping strategies, and that your partnership, if you're in one, is healthy as well. Now for schools specifically, some quick bits here if you're attending from a school that you guys can think about. First, get vaping detectors if you can in your bathrooms. Regular smoke detectors, of course, don't pick this up, but there are special vaping ones. Partner with your local DFCs, your local drug-free coalitions, and if you have youth leaders in your school, on outreach and messaging. Make it local, make it culturally relevant, make it something that your community will respond to. Really examine the culture around vaping in your school, because this is an issue where a lot of folks aren't necessarily responsive to facts. This is a cultural thing. And so you've got to engage with it at the cultural level within the school. If you think about smoking in society, why smoking declined wasn't because the Surgeon General said it caused cancer. It was because it stopped being cool. Broad strokes, right? But that was the main reason. And that was a huge amount of effort across a lot of different parts of society. So if you can scope that down to your community and make it not cool where you are, that goes a long way. You can educate about this in health and PE classes. So many kids in schools that I work with, they have not heard so much of what we've talked about today. To that end, actually feel free to look up on my website. I have a package for schools specifically of resources and tools. If that's something you're interested in, please check that out there as well. There's strong referral lines, or rather, please develop strong referral lines for students who need help. So counseling resources and quitting resources as well. So if they want to stop or need help with some emotional issue, they can find that. Here are the resources. Each one of these websites is a treasure trove of information. Please check them out. They are tremendous advocates, so much good information on every single one of these websites, webinars, blogs, etc. 3 books I'd recommend. This book, The Devil's Playbook, is about the rise of Juul, where it came from, how it got here. Weed Inc. dives deep into what's going on in the commercial cannabis industry. And The Dangerous Truth About Today's Marijuana is the story of Johnny Stack's death by psychotic. He had a psychotic episode and committed suicide at the age of 19. And his mother started Johnny's Ambassadors and then wrote a book about his story, as well as infused it with a tremendous amount of great information. If you have kids who are trying to quit, I'd recommend these 2 websites, teen.smokefree.gov/quit-vaping, and then This is Quitting by the Truth Initiative is an evidence-based, text-based assistance program for kids to try to stop vaping. We'll help them out on their phones. Check it out. It's very useful and actually one of the few resources that we have. Another one, though, that is very useful is the Operation Parent Handbook. I have a copy back there on my bookshelf. It is absolutely worth it. They have sections for elementary school, for middle and high school on vaping and marijuana with fantastic information. So that's the link to pick up the handbook. I wholeheartedly endorse it as well. So to summarize everything, and again, thanks for sticking with the whirlwind today, guys. I know we really, like a snowball going downhill here at the end, but vaping and marijuana are chronically misunderstood. It's not an accident. There are rich folks trying to get even more wealthy off of young people. From a health perspective, kids should not vape. The only benefit is if they're completely switching from cigarettes to vapes. And even then, if you have like 1 foot in each camp, it's actually potentially worse for you. So kids should not be vaping. They are putting bunches of chemicals into their lungs. THC in marijuana is far from benign. It affects them in a myriad different ways. In marijuana and THC, they can be vaped. Higher potency these days leads to greater problems. For you parents and caregivers, staying connected, knowing the signs, helping your kid get the help they need are the most important steps that you can take. So again, thank you guys so much for sticking around to the end here. Here's my email, here's my website. Please connect with me. I'm also very active on LinkedIn in particular. I push out almost everything that you see in these presentations when it comes out there. I do a podcast and a YouTube channel, so please feel free to find me there as well. So, all right, I don't know if we can stay a couple minutes late for questions, but if so, I'm game. I'll pass it back to the operation parent folks. And Rochelle, you are still muted, unfortunately.
Okay, got it. Of course we can. We've got some awesome questions lined up, and I think you can tick away at them pretty easily. Okay, so we've got several questions about the vaping sensors that are being installed in schools. So I'd like to start there. Um, okay, this is really good. A teacher wants us to think about how we can offer care and support to students who receive that violation from the sensors in the bathrooms, and not only focusing on consequences and punishment, but focusing on support and care for those students and helping them.
Yeah, well, so here's the tidbit I'd like to give you guys on that. There's always a reason behind everyone's behavior, and definitely kids. So if you see a child vaping, there is a reason why. They're trying to meet a very natural need. So you're completely right. Being punitive, you do not punish this behavior out of kids. Best case scenario, they stop for a little bit and they start up again at college, right? So what you actually want to do is you want to get at the reason, the why behind the vaping. Are they trying to be part of a social group? Are they feeling lonely? Are they feeling anxious? Are they feeling depressed? And then engage them there. Just coming down on them for the behavior misses the most important thing, which is the reason why. And if you take care of that reason why, although you can have a separate nicotine addiction, sometimes it takes care of itself. But if you don't take care of the why, the problem is going to keep coming back and back and back again.
That's such great advice. Just go deeper with the conversations, and overall, do you feel as though they're successful or effective, the vaping sensors in the bathrooms? Are you feeling like it's a good move?
You know, I've heard. So the one thing I will say, I don't have as much familiarity with the sensors. They're very sensitive. They can do a lot of different. You do then still have to follow up on them. So schools have to have a procedure for it. In my opinion, more information is better, particularly if there's bullying happening in the bathrooms, if there's vaping happening in the bathrooms, so that you have awareness, so that you can do something about it. Um, but yeah, I think it's at the very least looking into and thinking about as a school, does this fit what you need, because so many high school students know that. I think one student told me it's like smelling the rainbow every time you go in, because just so many kids are vaping in there. And it's worth mentioning as well that secondhand vape aerosol does still have carcinogens in it. So that's still poisoning their lungs if a non-vapor and a non-smoker walks into those bathrooms. So it's important to really think about keeping your kids as safe as possible at school as we can.
Yeah, it's a great line of defense because I know that's where a lot of students are first offered a vape is in the school bathroom, and so you're right. The more we know, the more we can do, right?
Yeah.
Um, So a parent has asked about a teen that is currently vaping but wants to quit and is struggling with the quitting process. Can you mention a couple of quit resources that you like?
Yeah, well, absolutely. So I'd refer you back to that slide. This is quitting also. I really like that. It's got great evidence behind it. Beyond that, though, uh, therapy works. There are addiction specialists like myself who work with folks all the time on this, as well as for older teens. Although it is off-label, there are medicines that can help as well. That if you talk to your pediatrician, they can decide whether or not that might be useful for your son or daughter as well. Because we know that the quit rates for nicotine replacement therapy, for even things like Chantix, it's the brand name for another one, that actually is significantly higher than for those who don't use it. But again, it is not FDA approved under the age of 18. You can still get prescribed it, but like with any medication, and this is not medical advice coming from me here, it's to ask your physician, your pediatrician about it, and they can help you decide if that's a good course of action as well.
Can you think of a particular teen quitting resource that you like? Like when,
Oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
like I was just thinking about like an organization that has either good YouTube videos or um, a library of things that parents could read.
100%. Truth Initiative is leading the way on a lot of this. They are doing peer-reviewed research. They are publishing on it. I'm actually interviewing for my podcast their CEO, Robin Koval, in I think a week or two. I'll be
Oh,
recording
excellent.
that interview. So I'm excited to talk to her directly and hear more about their work. But they are absolutely fantastic for that. Um, that would be my first choice. But truly, all of those. On that resource slide, I encourage folks to download the presentation either right now from the handouts tab or from the email that you're going to get and visit those websites. Hours and hours and hours of webinars and content and information that folks can look at. Not all of them are directed at teens, although I do know that Johnny's Ambassadors has a whole curriculum for THC prevention for teens. So that would be another place to go if you're looking for something on marijuana and THC specifically.
You mentioned the apps. So there's actually quitting apps that a teen could put on their phone, and it gives them visual reminders about sort of changing their routine so that it's easier to not be in the same place where they're used to smoking or vaping. Like, and it's constant daily reminders that can help keep them on track. So I would say checking out some of those apps might be worth it as well.
You know, another one, I'm not sure if this is available for kids, but there's an app made by a great individual and scientist named Dr. Judson Brewer. He's an MD, PhD, who's done a lot of work in this area. It's called Craving to Quit, and it's based on CBD and mindfulness principles, and it also has had some research behind it. That one is not free though. You do pay a subscription to go to that one. I believe that one is also formatted for smoking. But there's a lot of overlap in these processes. So that could be worth looking into. But again, and I always have my ear to the ground for new resources. I'm not just coming back to the Truth Initiative because I like them, you know, they are really some of the only ones making this. So check out This Is Quitting. It's a text-based thing. So every day you get a text message right in your text feed with all the rest of your texts. You can ask for more motivation, support, whatever you need. It's quality, and it is free.
It's a win-win. You know that a teen is likely to have their phone nearby, so it's a good hand-in-hand resource. So while we're
Yeah.
talking about organizations that have good resources, what about groups that are legislating with safety around vaping? Who are your favorites there, and where do you go for some of your resources on legislating against vaping?
Really good question. So this is another area where unfortunately public health is a bit more fragmented and doesn't have the same resources as say the vape industry does. They have a very large, wealthy lobbying group. Groups that I can say do work on vaping, the American Lung Association, the American Heart Association, Truth Initiative again, Parents Against Vape PAVE from the previous slide, they do a lot. Johnny's Ambassadors does work on the THC side. There are individual senators and individual representatives as well who have done a lot of work on this. This is just the top of my head. I'm in Illinois, and I know that one of my senators, Dick Durbin, has done a lot of work on vaping and flavors. In particular, his name comes to mind just because I know he has been one of the most vocal folks about it. But I'm sure that there are members of both parties who are concerned about this of different states. I'm just not aware of it off the top of my head. What I would say, though, is that you would be surprised at how much a phone call to your local representative in your state legislature and state governing bodies, as well as your federal ones, matters. Their staffers take notes on how many people call and how many people email about these things. And a call for many of them does count more to them than an email. Their numbers are all online. You can just give their office a call, say how you feel, say why. They'll take it down, and the representative will hear about it.
That's excellent. The campaign for tobacco-free kids is on your list of ones that you like to. Where would you direct people to maybe take a look there first? Do you have something on the top of your head that you like there? If not, we
Not
we
from
had
the
the
website.
link in the PowerPoint, so there's no pressure there to come up with something, but they have some really amazing deep research for tobacco and vaping that folks may want to reference.
hmm Yeah, I'd encourage you folks to dive deep into all of those websites. They're very content rich, And many of them, the bigger ones, do have oftentimes at least some like legislative or policy director. And if you're interested in finding that out, all you have to do is look at their staff. And if they have anyone like government relations, anything like that, it means that they're working in that area.
One of our attendees asked for your opinion on what you feel like the age range is right now for um, a teen who might be more likely to drive high than to drink, or if you have just some thoughts about that.
So so generally speaking, when we look at kids starting to use substances, we see a lot. It escalates as they get older, which should come as no surprise. But you know, you'd probably be looking more at the 15, 16, 17 range in terms of the younger folks. I don't know about like the interaction effects between age and likelihood to drive drunk or high. I'm not sure exactly how that looks, but at the end of the day, I would have honest and open conversations with your kids about it. They didn't actually explicitly call that out in the slide, but it does make a difference. And if you ask them about like, hey, and it's always helpful if you do that as well to ask like, do you have any friends who, rather than saying, have you ever, how do you feel about, how do your friends feel about this sort of thing? That's actually a very well studied approach that makes it less threatening or accusatory and allows for them to talk more about what's going on in their world than if you as their parent are like, how do you feel about driving high? How do you feel about driving drunk? You're much more likely to get just a knee-jerk, you know, positive, you know, what you want to hear answer there than hearing a more truthful one.
That's absolutely right. And you've taught us too to, if we're watching a show together and there's some risky behavior or something like that, to use that as a leaping pad for discussion, or there's lots of things that you can do to kind of bring it out into the third person but still have a very good discussion. I love that. So good. Um, so can you give us a couple of maybe nicknames or emojis that teens are using to text or maybe chat back and forth about marijuana?
Oh, I can do you one better. So, oh, do I have it? Let me see if I can search my computer. So the DEA has published a full list of this, actually, of all of the emojis to look for. I cannot find it quickly. I was hoping I could just do a quick search and pull it up. But if you Google, or maybe if Amanda, if you're able to look this up, DEA drug emoji list. It's a one-page PDF. You can print it off. It's got everything on there. So I'm going to refer you to that document. I wish I
That's
could just share my
excellent.
screen right
We
now and
we
show
can
you.
share that in our May webinar as well, since we're going to focus on fentanyl. We'll make sure and show the emoji list again as we're working on that. That great resource. Okay, so how do you recognize, give us just a couple of reminders about how a parent might recognize if marijuana is becoming problematic with their teen.
Yeah. Well, so sometimes it's hard to know specifically if it's marijuana unless you find like a vape device or you find the flower around, or you find some paraphernalia. You might just notice that something is off. But a couple of things that you could notice for are behavioral changes around you in terms of, are they acting lethargic? Are they acting distant? Does it seem like there's times where just something is off or not right about them? If they have red eyes, that's a very telltale THC specific sign that they might be using THC. Another one sometimes that you see with high potency concentrates are dilated pupils. So if the pupil is very large, that also can be a sign. It's also a sign potentially of opioid use, but we also do see that with THC products as well. But so I'd refer you back to that slide of signs. I went pretty in depth there on some different ones, but those would be probably the big ones. Of course, if you smell it, of course, if you find any very direct signs of it, marijuana can smell a few different ways, but it's got a very kind of like pungent, a lot of people call it skunk-like smell. You know, like if you've smelled it before, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, you know, I guess it's kind of hard to describe other than that, but that would be my first suggestion. You're probably not dealing with THC if someone's dealing with like a lot of energy, like if they're acting like really manic or jittery, that's probably more of like a stimulant of some sort, like cocaine or something like that. Cocaine or Adderall, Ritalin, something that, you know, hypes them up. THC might make someone paranoid or anxious for sure, but also might really slow them down or make them more lethargic, tired, or amotivated.
Got it. Okay. So we made it through our batch of questions. That's amazing. I'm just gonna
And
share.
Amanda came through. She found the emojis. They're in the chat. Thank you,
Oh
Amanda.
yeah. Oh, that's
You're
excellent.
amazing.
Very good. Um, so I want to just give folks a little bit of information about Operation Parent as we're wrapping up here today. We want to have you take a look at our handbooks. If you're here with us live, or if you registered for the webinar, you are eligible for a special offer. So we've got a new elementary handbook for $9.99, a middle and high handbook for $14.99. Want to let you all know we are seeing that we need to get to our teens earlier and earlier to talk about tough issues in our culture. So we have marijuana already mentioned in our elementary handbook. So if you have that, as Dr. Weiner mentioned earlier, going to page 27 and doing a little bit of reading on some thoughts about age-appropriate ways to start to talk about marijuana early would be really good. We have a very special offer today. You can get 11% off an individual or a bulk order, and you can go right to operationparent.org/shop and take a look at all the varieties of our handbook. We have Spanish editions, Christian edition, the middle and high we've spoken quite a bit about, and you can apply that discount today to any edition. If you have one already, we encourage you to consider buying one to share with your best friend, your sister-in-law, your cousins, your neighbors. Anything you can do to protect the tribe of folks that are hanging around with your teens helps. And so even buying a copy and sharing it with the counselors at your school, this is an amazing, affordable prevention resource that we'd like to get in as many hands as possible. That's why we're offering free shipping. And then I'll just remind you all too that we have amazing community advocates. So if you're with a drug-free coalition and you want to hear more about what the DFCs are doing around the country with handbooks and sharing them throughout the community, um, both Allie and Carol could share lots of strategies and really creative ideas, not just about the handbook, but if you want to just talk about prevention across the country, we'd really, really love that. And I don't know if most of you all are aware that Operation Parent is a 501c3 organization, and that we're working really hard to continue to offer these webinars for free. So if you're interested in also thinking about making a donation, or you want to learn more about that, please reach out to us on that as well. So if you're not following us already on social media, we hope that you will do so. We are on Facebook and Instagram. We're growing our LinkedIn community like Dr. Weiner is. We're growing our YouTube presence a bit. And so I hope that you'll join us in whatever version of social media that you're into. We had a little contest on social media, a great contest, and we're going to do a video and do the drawing for the winner from our most recent contest on those platforms here shortly. So probably tomorrow or the next day. But again, we're honored that you would spend your afternoon with us. We're thankful to be a part of this prevention journey. And Dr. Weiner, as always, we are so happy to know you and so thankful that you were willing to join us for another webinar. So we hope everybody has a wonderful afternoon, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time in May. Thanks so much.
Take care, everyone. Be
Take
well.
care, y'all.